Motherhood is where it all begins. It is our literal origin story, and as a therapist, I knew we could do a better job supporting new moms. Come with me on this journey as we build the digital village, one family at a time. Becca wears a lot of hats around here. You met her in episode 1. She is the COO of Dancy Perinatal and my business bestie, we'll call her. But she happens to be our in-house sex and intimacy expert. We call her Sexpert for short. Today you get to learn a little bit about perinatal, sex and intimacy, all the questions you want to ask, wish your doctor would cover, and all the rest. I think this episode is really informative and fun. I hope you enjoy. I'm so glad you're back, Becca, and I'm so glad we get to talk about this subject because I think this is one that a lot of people are going to be interested in. For those of you who don't know, Becca is like our resident sex and intimacy expert at Dancy Perinatal. I remember when you told me, gosh, it was a while ago now, that you were interested in like pursuing more education on the subject. How long has it been? It's been a while.
Well, it has been 5 years because I found out I was pregnant with Miles my first weekend away at training.
So we know exactly.
So
That's so funny.
New ventures seem to line up with my children.
I was going to say, if anybody heard our sort of introduction, Becca's second born was like exactly in alignment with the starting of this company. And so I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
You just exude passion, like all your passion projects show up at the same time, I guess.
I know. I'm just like, ooh, new venture. I need something new in my life. And then all of it comes together.
Let's add a baby with that.
Yeah.
Sure. Who doesn't need to also add postpartum time period and recovery and motherhood? Yeah. So I was really excited to have you come and talk about this because I will just say, I think that this is an area, probably you're not surprised to hear me say, it's just so ignored. Mm-hmm. I feel like, I don't know what your clients are saying, but mine are like, you know what? I showed up to my 6-week appointment and my provider was like, you good? You good? Okay, great. Let's talk birth control. Green light.
Yeah. Well, and now providers are talking even before you have a baby. Like, should we just put in birth control right after you deliver while we're already doing stuff? And so sometimes, the conversation is in that moment. You're like, I have no idea what I want and what I need and what it's
pretty much all of my clients laugh. They're like, sex, pregnancy. They're like, you've got to be kidding. Yeah. So I guess that's a good place to start. I'll just say, this is your specialty and not mine. So you tell me. I feel like what I've seen in working with perinatal clients and specifically postpartum clients for as long as I have is like generally the reason it comes up so much is because there's a huge decrease in desire after you have a baby. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And actually what I would say is the decrease actually typically happens in pregnancy, but I think that we feel more okay with that because our body is bigger or heavier or feels more awkward or we're so exhausted we don't think about it. And then somehow when we get that 6-week approval appointment, it's like, oh, so now I'm supposed to. I'm supposed to want this again and desire this. Or now my partner's wanting and desiring this more because they think that I'm going to be interested again. And that there's this increase both in relational conflict and an internal conflict of, I used to have a lot of desire. I don't anymore. I don't feel interested. I feel exhausted. What does this mean about me? Is there something wrong with me? And I do hear that all the time.
Like a lot of people that you're talking to, they feel like something's wrong with them because sort of the insinuation is like, of course you're excited to jump back into sex. That's why we're talking about it.
Yes. Or like, this was such a huge part of your relationship. How could you just not want it anymore?
Yeah. What do you feel like? I mean, I've got my suspicions. I think that some of that message is coming from the partner. Do you feel like that's pretty common? My observation is like, we've gone through this massive transition. Even if we were already parents, still anytime there's a new child in the home, it's like a big transition. And so we've gone through this really big transition anyway, where there's way less time, energy, attention, affection, patience, money, whatever there's just like all the resources are stretched in that time. And then And so I find that where it often becomes an issue in my office with like couples is this like the partner being like, I want to feel close to you again. And that's a
Mhm.
part of you that is only shared between us. That's like not the mom you, not the public you, not like that's ours, that's our time, that's meaningful. And because I feel disconnected, it almost feels like more important, certainly not less.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think most of it comes from no education. I
Mm,
don't tend to have people coming in with a lot of education that's inaccurate. It's that nobody has talked about what to expect at all.
right.
So they're flying blind. And that, in essence, is sex in general, right? Where we are a hypersexualized culture with very little actual conversations about sex in relationships.
Mm-hmm.
What does intimate connection really look like and mean? What's normal? What's average? What can we expect? And so partners are really left to figure it out on their own, right? So couples are saying, okay, I don't want to ask, I don't want to push, but I do want. Or there's a lot of
Mm,
pain and discomfort. Maybe I'm interested, but it feels different. My body
mm-hmm.
feels different. I have different pain, different discomfort. I'm touched out, the number of people that it's like, I used to love when they would touch my nipples. And now uh, I'm nursing and I cannot
Right.
stand
Right.
having anybody near that region of my body. It
Get
doesn't feel sexy.
away.
It doesn't feel fun. Yeah.
Right.
And so then there's those changes on top of like, if I do want to lean into this experience, that it's a different one.
Right.
And
Right.
again,
Yep.
that can feel like it just feels off. And if we don't have a place to talk
Mm-hmm.
about it or a kind of a context for how to frame it, I think it's easy to turn it inward that there's something wrong with
Mm-hmm.
us. There's something wrong with the relationship. I'm not being seen
Yes.
and heard and understood. How could my partner think that I want this? I'm exhausted all day. Or how could my
Mm-hmm.
partner not want this? This was so important to us before. We were so passionate before. I felt so connected before.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Does
Yeah.
my partner not
And
desire me anymore? Do they not have time for me? Just these internal dialogues on both ends
yeah.
of partnership
Yeah.
that come
I feel
up.
like what I'm hearing you talk about is that there's this for some, there's like a sense of grief or loss. Like
Mhm.
th- and because we don't talk about it, because we don't talk about what's normal, what to expect, what it can look like long term, I think that there's two things that happen that I see. One is that there's a sense of loss and maybe fear
Mhm.
attached to that loss, like, oh my gosh, this is the new normal, this is how it's going to be forever now, right? And then
Yeah.
when that doesn't get addressed, or um when it doesn't get talked about, like I think in a kind or empathetic way, then that can turn into resentment.
Yes.
And then I see that maybe for some couples, down the line, recovery happens, baby starts sleeping, sexual desire returns, and it could at that point kind of go into a new, I don't know if you want to say rebound, or it could go into its own new place where there's like an increased desire at that point,
Mhm.
but the resentment hasn't been addressed. And I find that like now the resentment is a piece of it. So to me, I'm so
Yeah.
happy that you wanted to talk about this and that you do talk about this, both with like our staff and with your couples, because I feel like we got to air this out. Like we have to
Mhm.
talk about what's normal, what to expect. We get that in childbirth education, hopefully. Excuse me. We get that in like, conversations around if we've got, what is it like to breastfeed? What's it like to care for a newborn? What are we going to do
Yeah.
in terms of childcare and communication and sleep routines? And like, there's all this dialogue that can happen. I don't really know anybody who's like, and what about sex?
Yeah.
So, like a couple, let's say they're listening right now and they're expecting, like, what would you say to them almost like ahead of time, like preventatively? Like, what are the conversations they could be having?
Yeah, so one of the big focuses that I work with couples and encourage, clinicians or other professionals to talk about is a little bit the difference between intimacy and sex.
Mm,
That we often lump them together, that sex means penetrative intercourse
mm,
or orgasm, climax, right? This is sex. And so that's what generates intimacy.
mm,
And when we actually separate the two, we can find all of these ways to be intimate that don't get lost in the transition to postpartum, that actually can keep us grounded and connected to our partner, but don't have to involve more of the erotic ends of
mm.
sex. And that
Yes. So
really
when you're
that
talking about like, it's almost like sex and intimacy, they are coupled, like they are connected to each other, but we need to understand that we can have intimacy without like penetrative sex or intercourse or whatever phrase you want to
yeah.
use.
And so with my couples, I talk about intimacy and erotica. And
Mm,
erotica being that is like the sex part of it, where when we think about sex,
hmm
again, we want orgasm and climax and pleasure and all these things. And intimacy becomes that connection between the two people, because we can have sex
mm.
without connection and we can have connection without sex. And in especially partnered, relationships, oftentimes those get intertwined in a beautiful way. And so
hmm
what I find for couples is that when one of them goes away, though, so sometimes so does the other. And so helping
Yeah.
couples identify the difference between those two, of which ones feel really important. I actually like just holding your body at night and cuddling. And,
hmm
we always talk about the importance of skin to skin for new babies. And so I always talk with couples like skin to skin for you too.
Oh, I love that.
Because like we don't grow out of the need for skin to skin contact with other human beings, especially
Mm,
loving, nurturing human beings. And
right.
so what would it mean to lay naked or lay topless with your partner and just hold each other?
Yeah. I
And
love
when
the
those,
idea of even engaging in the conversation of like, look, hypothetically, like penetrative sex does not sound good to me right now. That's just not on the menu. I'm not there. My body's not there. Um, how can you still experience intimacy? What could we engage in together that would mean that we'd still feel connected?
yes. And that also then tends to ease the pressure on sex itself, because we're still getting all of these connections with each other. And that there is intentionality of the connecting of the two, that when desire returns, it doesn't feel foreign. It doesn't feel like, now I haven't even touched you in 8 months and I'm
Mhm.
kind of interested, but we feel like we're starting over. It's a new body for me. Maybe your body has changed. We're figuring this out. Instead, it's like, no, we've been connected all the way through. And now we get to add this either back in or add it in differently.
Yeah, that feels really protective. I think that's a great perspective shift because, back to the resentment piece. It's like the partner who has the higher desire. There's a place where resentment can take hold there of like I've
Mhm.
had this desire that's gone unmet. But I find the resentment can also happen the other direction, which is like particularly stereotypically like the postpartum woman who maybe has been low desire has felt like there hasn't been a lot of affection until
Mhm.
penetrative sex is back on the menu. And now all of a sudden you want to hug me, you want to give me a massage,
Mhm.
you want to snuggle now. But like,
Yeah.
where was all of this when I could have really used that sense of connection,
Yeah.
but wasn't
Or
ready?
I've been saying yes because I think you want it and not because I want
Mm.
it for myself. And
Okay, I
now
want to
you
talk
want,
about that.
yeah.
That was
And
my big question. Go ahead.
yeah. Well, it's like, and now you want me to, in some ways, perform, because sex can be performative sometimes, in a way that, but this isn't for me. And actually, the
hmm
research shows that the majority of postpartum women re-engage in sexual activity, not for their own desire, but because of the perceived desire of their partner.
hmm Yeah.
Research
Okay.
has
So that was going to
chosen
be my
into that.
question because I feel like even among our profession, I feel like there is, I don't know if this is your perspective. I see there is a controversy around this. Like, is it okay or not to engage in sexual intercourse like for your partner's benefit when you're just kind of meh about it? Now, I want to
Yeah.
be clear like if there is a clear no in your body, like no, this hurts, no, this makes me feel
Mhm.
bad. Okay, that's not what I'm talking about. But there's a large area of gray where it's like, it doesn't sound appealing, but it also
Mhm.
doesn't sound like a no. It's just kind of not top of my priority list. And is it a good thing or not to just say, okay, I'm just gonna give this to you because I love you and I care about you and it's important to you. And what I hear from some people is like, I'll probably even start enjoying the process once I get there. It's just the getting there part. Like, I feel like this is so controversial because I'll hear some mental health providers who are like, never, never, never. It's traumatizing. It's negative. It introduces obligation into the sexual relationship. Never do it. And then I feel like then there's others who will say things like, well, and this is where I tend to fall. It's like we do things for our partner because it's meaningful for them. That's like not
Mhm.
always our very first choice. Like activity choice that means something more for our other partner, or
The
conversation
dinner you're
isn't
cooking.
equally easy for both partners, or like cooking you dinner, your acts of service, love language.
Mhm.
We in good partnerships try to meet our partner's needs when it feels like it doesn't cost us a lot and it feels like it's something that's okay to say yes to. So is sex really that different? Okay, I'm very interested because I know you've learned a lot about this and advised people a lot. What do you say about that?
Yeah. And so I do go down to like what it means to consent, right? Which is to
Mm-hmm.
feel like I can say yes means I also feel like I can say no. And so that's
Yeah.
where I pull out the idea of like obligation or coercion, right? If you don't feel like you can say no because you're going to be punished or you're going to be ignored or you're going to be shamed or you're going to be pushed and pushed and pushed, then I talk about like that's not true consent, right? That's consent under duress.
Yeah, that's so important. Yeah. To be able to say
And
yes, you need to feel like you can say no. And in
Mhm.
this case, we don't just mean you can say no and nothing, obviously nothing harmful or abusive happens, but also you can say no and not be iced out or
Mhm.
shamed or guilt tripped, or that you
Yes.
can say no, and that's within the relationship, that's respected
Mhm.
and
This is
received.
an acceptable answer.
Hmm.
And so that's typically where I start. But once that established, I do talk a lot about like, what is the purpose of sex? And sometimes the
Hmm.
purpose of sex is to please my partner because I'm not into it. Sometimes
Mm,
the purpose of sex is for passion and connection. Sometimes it's purely for pleasure based. Sometimes it is for risk and adventure. Sometimes it is for play and laughter. And it's not
mm,
sometimes it's for procreation and I'm trying to
yeah.
conceive and I peed on the ovulation stick and I'm mad at you today, but I want to do it because I want to have this baby with you.
Oh
And
man. Yep.
right,
That's a whole
all the
other
reasons.
introduction into postpartum sex, is like sometimes the trying to conceive sex is like you went into the pregnancy already with some sexual static.
Yes. And so
Yeah.
really looking at like the purpose of sex can be different. And for me, as long
And
as
that's
there is
okay.
true consent, yeah,
Hmm.
and communication around it, right? That will
What
allow
if
for
one
sometimes
partner has one purpose and the other partner has a different purpose?
I think that's okay as long as they've communicated it. And then they
Okay.
both get to consent to that. Right. That
Yeah.
there are plenty of times, even with my partner, that I'm like, I'm not really into it, but we can if you really want. And he'll say, no, I want connection with you. So if you're not into it, that doesn't fill my need in this moment. Other times
Mm.
he's like, yep, take what I can get in this moment.
It's
But it's
good for me.
open dialogue, right? There's shared
Hmm.
conversation about that. It doesn't feel like it's hidden under the table. And that helps me not feel resentful. It helps me not feel like I'm trying to perform or meet some need that I really didn't want to do, that I'm
Hmm.
authentic in my experience of it, while
Yeah.
also giving him the opportunity to be authentic in his. And so
Hmm.
helping facilitate these conversations because most couples don't have them prior to kids either. And so, really shifting the dialogue around what do we want to get out of this? What is my
Yeah.
goal of this interaction? If you want passion and
I
connection,
like
but I'm
that.
not interested in sex, is there
Yeah.
a different way that I can help create passion in
Yeah.
our relationship right now?
I love that. What are some examples off the top of your head of non-sexual passion creators?
So, I will say non erotic massage is my number one recommendation. Create a
Love that.
consistent schedule, even 5 minutes of alternating, you know, just touching each other's body tends to do
Hmm.
wonders for our connection with each other.
Hmm.
Um, Naked cuddling is a big one on my list too. Really helps folks feel connected. But so does playing a board game where you're sitting on your bed across from each other making eye contact.
Yeah.
Or there's tons of conversation cards out there at this point. I love Gottman
Oh
Card
yeah,
Deck
there's
is a
great
free
apps and
app.
stuff. Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Say that one
that
again
works.
because I talked over you a little.
Oh, it's the Gottman Card Deck app. So
Good
it's made
one.
by the
Yeah.
Gottmans, who are like relationship guru experts, and it's free to download. There's a million categories and different things, but they even have sex questions. And so
Hmm.
sometimes I'll be like, talk about a fantasy together, knowing that you're not going to act it out at all,
Hmm.
right? If we could fly somewhere just to have sex, where would we go?
Yeah, that's fun. I liked what you said about how sex can be for play, because I think that gets lost in this conversation when it starts to become a source of pain or rejection or contention or
Mhm.
resentment. It's like we lose sight of the fact that it can be for play, and that actually could be a gift for both partners, because parenting a newborn is like the opposite of play. It's just a lot of hard work. And
Yeah.
so if sex could actually be something playful, that might be a relief for both of you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And really, one of my biggest like big signs like pay attention to is the idea of pleasure over performance.
Mm,
And so performance-based sex is, and it's more based on kind of a male flow of sex of, kind of you have desire, then you have arousal, then you have stimulation, then you have climax.
mm-hmm.
And that is our like notion of what sex should be. And if all of those pieces don't happen, then there's something wrong or it wasn't good.
Mm.
Versus pleasure-based sex is this felt good in my body, on my
Oh,
body,
yeah.
in my body, for my body. Whether that involves arousal or climax is not the purpose.
Oh, yeah.
And so I also encourage couples to do something that is not going to relate to climax, that just feels pleasurable. That's part of the non-erotic massage, identifying textures and items that feel good on their skin.
Yeah, I love this. This is a great segue into one of my questions I had for you because I feel like one of the things that factors into this a lot is that after giving birth, your body's really different.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be, insecurity. Like I feel insecure about the way that it looks or
Mm-hmm.
performs or the weight that I'm at or how my clothes fit or whatever, that can be really based on body image, but it can also be based on the fact that like anatomically after
Mm-hmm.
pregnancy with or without vaginal birth, there's like changes. Things feel different.
Yeah.
They they behave differently. And some of that is temporary and some of that is new normal. And so I think that what you're talking about is an important segue, which is like, what if we just introduce pleasure play you said
Mm-hmm.
before, but like what if we just introduce pleasure instead of performance? Because I don't know if you found this, but I have found that sometimes even orgasm is like a little more unpredictable than
Mm-hmm.
pre-birth for a while. Like
Yeah.
lubrication, orgasm, like the physiology is not as predictable. And
Mm-hmm.
again, so if you come to it with a sense of like you must perform and it must be like it used to be, that can just be a lot of pressure for both people.
Yeah. If you have a partner that's working so hard to get you to climax and it's not happening, and then you're both frustrated with it,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
or, it's painful in things that you used to really enjoy. And so I want to make sure to note that I recommend everybody
mm-hmm.
go see a pelvic floor specialist, whether
Yes.
you are
I don't know
a week
why this is not
postpartum.
100% of the time. It
Yeah.
should be.
I know, or 10 years postpartum. If you've never seen a pelvic floor specialist, get a referral, go see one, because that is part of it, is like the body is shifting and changing and moving and adjusting to like carrying children. And as you said, whether that's a vaginal delivery or not, there's so much that has shifted and moved in
Mm-hmm,
order to create new life.
mm-hmm,
And unless you can work with somebody who can say, here's ways to strengthen, here's way to loosen, here's way to, right, do this or do this,
mm-hmm,
we tend to see more issues, especially around sex, because there is pain or discomfort or difficult
mm-hmm,
with orgasm.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Because yes, it's really hard to relax into an orgasm if I'm physically in pain or it's uncomfortable or it's not
Yeah,
pleasurable
go
the way it was
figure.
before.
Go
Yeah,
figure
because
if it's
all of
like
my muscles are
physically
like this.
uncomfortable. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, for those of you who don't know what Becca's talking about, what she's talking about is a type of physical therapist. So, these are medical professionals, just like a physical therapist. If you had a major surgery or had a serious injury, you would go see a physical therapist. In other parts of the world, after giving birth, patients are immediately referred to pelvic floor physical therapy, whether or not they show any signs of dysfunction, just like you would be if you had major surgery. You would always
Mhm.
go to a physical therapist after major surgery just to make sure that the function is optimal and do what you can in the early stages. So it's just really absurd that the standard of care is not that here. That's abnormal within our country, but there are physical therapists who specialize in the pelvic floor, which is all of the internal insides, everything that the hammock that is holding up the baby or birthing the baby if you have a vaginal birth, all of that is shifted, impacted. And what I've learned through my own journey of working with pelvic floor physical therapy is that what we're reading online is like do Kegels, and it's not that that's a bad thing, but or some people pronounce it Kegels. I'm always confused. Anyway,
I would
however
say
you want to
Kegels.
say it,
So
Kegels. It's not that that's bad advice, but the issue is that what I'm starting to learn from experts in this area is that more women are actually over tightened when they call
Mhm.
hypertonic The problem is not that they're not tight enough. The problem is that it's too tight. And
Yeah,
so what
it's
will
not
happen is
relaxing.
they're not able to, yeah, that the muscles aren't relaxing.
Mhm.
And so without the feedback of like a professional, you might think, oh, I just need to do exercises and tighten up. And you actually may be doing exactly the opposite of what your body needs in order to be in optimal health. And so just know that like you're not in this by yourself. Like Becca's saying, there are professionals who are very, very well educated in the subject who just
Mhm.
meeting with them a handful of times can make a tremendous difference. And so if you
Yeah.
are feeling like your postpartum body is like, whoa, wait a minute, what's going on here? You don't have to just say, okay, that's how it is from now on.
Mhm.
There are people who are qualified to help you.
Yeah, and I want to really piggyback on the word optimal, right? That you don't have to be in excruciating pain or unable to do things to feel like maybe it just feels different, maybe it feels off, or maybe everything's fine, but actually nobody's ever checked anything since I've had children. Of just to go and see, are my muscles truly relaxing? Am I, you know, are they strong enough? And they'll test the core strength and all the different areas to see what's happening. And oftentimes it is only a few visits that they can give you the exercises that you need specific for your body to tune into the pieces of how your body's responding, to
Mm-hmm.
really allow more space and opportunity for you to explore your own sexuality and your own sexual interests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I hope that what people are getting from this more than anything is that there's a lot of resources that just because you aren't hearing about them, if maybe from your provider, that doesn't mean they don't exist. Unfortunately, there's,
Mhm.
no surprise to anybody hearing this. There's an issue with getting all of the postpartum professionals to work interactively and cooperatively. There's an issue with getting payment for these things through insurance and that sort of stuff. And so because of that, a lot of people fall through the cracks. But not in addition to like the mental health care work that we do to help people connect and figure out what's going on for them mentally and emotionally, there's also physical work that you can do.
Yeah.
And a little bit goes a long way. Like, for instance, one of the things I was surprised to learn is that it's not that uncommon to have sort of what they call like a paradoxical reaction, meaning like you think you're tensing, but you're not, or you think you're relaxing, but you're tensing. And without rewiring that responsiveness in your
Mhm.
body, like that can cause downstream all kinds of like discomfort and issues. And those things are very easy to resolve with just like a little bit of expertise. So that's a little plug for not just the mental emotional part of it, but also the physical part. Okay, so last question I have for you is like, what if I want it? Right? So I'm postpartum. I want it, but I don't want it. What if I'm that postpartum mom right now who's like, I want it. I love my partner. I remember how I used to enjoy it, but I don't want it. Talk to me for a moment. Like, what should I take from this?
So the first thing I would say is, of course.
Yeah.
Of course, with new demands on your body, on your mental load, on all the piece, it makes so much sense that that gets thrown out.
Mm-hmm.
And to normalize that it's okay to not want it. It will come back. Desire is, I know it feels fickle sometimes, but it does return for us. It does come back. And it's about really identifying like what are the barriers that get in the way. The number one barrier is sleep.
Mm.
If I'm not sleeping consistently, solid sleep, it's really hard for me to lean into wanting to add sexual desire. It just feels like work. And that is just true for so many families out there. And so I
Mm-hmm.
always start with just normalizing the experience that returning to really sexual activity anytime within the first year postpartum is still within a normal range. Average is going to be 6 months, not 6 weeks, 6 months
6 months before.
before we want to re-engage in like sexual intercourse.
Okay.
And there's lots of factors that vary. Again, if there's traumatic birth, how pregnancy went, how conception went, there's all these other factors. But as far as just general tools to increase desire, if you're like, no, things feel in a better place, but desire just hasn't returned, I go to, are you moving your body? Are you
Mm.
eating well? Right? Are you nourished so that your body's in a good space to be able to lean in? And then looking at how are you connecting intimately to your partner before we add in some of that like erotic energy. And
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes, if we have consistent intimacy, the desire naturally follows.
Mm.
They're also kind of the old school sex therapy said we have to have desire before arousal, otherwise, it doesn't work. And as you mentioned earlier, Krista, the truth is for some folks, if I lean into intimacy, my desire then follows.
Mm,
And then
right.
sometimes, again, with the consent, like we talked about before, it's okay to say, mentally, I'm not desiring this, but I know part of me wants to. So I'm going to lean in and I'm going to let my body do the rest as I get into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If we are talking about sex, if we are communicating about sex, if we are creating room for sex and intimacy, our desire will naturally increase.
Oh, yeah. I love that. I love that the way you're talking about it gives this sort of holistic approach of like looking at sex within intimacy and looking at them as two things that also work together, but they're not one and the same. So just because partners are not having sexual intercourse does not mean that they can't have intimacy. I think is so empowering for people. Um, so empowering to say, okay, we don't have to just like wait on the timeline of the physiology or whatever it is, or the sleep timeline necessarily, which doesn't
Yeah.
always feel in our control, but I can do something now to sort of make an investment in our future hopeful sexual life, which isn't happening today, but one day I want it.
Yes.
I hope it happens again. It's important to me and my partner and,
Yeah.
the way that we connect.
And introducing, any sort of erotic things around you,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's reading books that have erotica in it, watching shows or movies that have erotic scenes in them, things that are going to get your brain naturally like, ooh, that looks good, or ooh, that sounds fun. And like beginning to explore your own fantasies again. And really, it starts with yourself. And I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we turn and expect that our partner is going to create that in us.
Mm,
But that really putting it back to for us that like I can lean into this as I want, whether that's a partnered activity or not. Masturbation can be a great way of like, can I get a feel for my body again? Do I know
mm-hmm.
what I like at this moment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And finally, I, I I want to take a moment before we're done to acknowledge like we are talking about a healthy, average, typical process of pregnancy and birth. I'm aware that there's people probably listening to us right now that didn't have an average, typical, healthy pregnancy or birth,
Mhm.
right? Things like infertility leading up to it and the process of trying to conceive, things like complicated pregnancies with hyperemesis or blood pressure issues or hospitalizations,
Mhm.
medically scary things, NICU stays, and then traumatic births. Like all of these are going to change what you and I are talking about because you're
Mhm.
not just recovering from like what's average or expected. You heard Becca say average or expected is like a 6-month wait, right? So that's the average. But then when you add things like I have trauma that I need to resolve, or my
Mhm.
body has physically endured trauma that needs more healing time, or our
Yeah.
baby has needed more from us, or going into pregnancy, we weren't in a good spot. So it's really hard to get back there because we weren't there very long. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things are all going to add to the process. But I think that the tools are still the tools, which is let's remove performance. Let's think about what feels good in my body. Let's think about what's pleasure. Let's introduce
Yeah.
play. Let's introduce intimacy without sexual pressure or expectation. And
Mhm.
for me to have a true yes, it's really important that I have a true no as an option.
Mhm.
I think those are all true. Wouldn't you say, even like regardless of how like the birth itself
Yeah.
went or the pregnancy?
Absolutely. And I think those are the things that really will transcend a lifetime because
Mhm.
you'll have lots of, ups and downs throughout a long-term relationship or, you know, that these become kind of the core touchstones that we come back to when we find
Yeah.
disconnection.
Oh my gosh, that's such a great point because, I think for the average person, because of the time period in our life when we have babies, typically we're on the younger end. Maybe we've been pretty able-bodied, fortunately, most of our existence. But if you're going to stay partnered with this person long term, like
Mhm.
there can be illnesses and injuries and grief and hardships and things that will. The ebb and flow is like always going to be the ebb and flow. And so
Yeah.
I think it's so important to look at it as like this is a blip, this is a
Mhm.
time period, and we're gonna ebb and flow together, right? And right
Yeah.
now it's one partner that maybe is needing a little bit more patience and a little bit more understanding, but guess what, next time it might be the other partner. So let's just remember that what goes
Yeah.
around comes around. Right? And bring graciousness and understanding and empathy, and maybe as appropriate, a little bit of humor and levity to the situation, because, next time it might be you that needs a little
Yeah.
bit extra understanding. Right. And the time period,
Yeah.
a long-term sexual relationship has the opportunity for lots of highs and lows.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Pun
absolutely.
intended.
Oh, what a great place to end. I was wondering, I was like, I wonder if we're going to be mature about this. What a perfect place to end. All right. Do you have any final thoughts about like tools that you'd recommend for people?
I guess the only other thing I would say is have lube,
Oh,
especially
yeah.
for, postpartum, when you're ready to engage in intercourse, whether you think you need it or not, have it on hand, use it the first time, because we really want
Generous. Just be
to,
really generous.
yeah, just
Yep.
like err on the side of caution in some of those regards.
Err on the side of,
And
I think we overdid it.
yeah, put a towel down if you need it, it'll be fine.
It's going to
Uh,
be fine. Yep.
yeah.
Yep. It's so important, right? Because we want to have positive and comfortable association with it.
Yes. Yeah, we don't need to
Yeah.
add extra hurdles.
Yeah.
And so just, using those tools, trying new positions. And I think one of the other pieces that I really encourage couples is to not take it personal if it doesn't go the way you want or how you want, or you don't
So
like something
important.
your partner's doing, or they don't like something you're doing. I joke a lot that it's kind of like cooking dinner. Right.
Mm.
Sometimes you may cook the same meal and one time it doesn't taste that good and the next time it does. And that's okay. Or your partner may not be in the mood for that today and that's
Yeah.
okay. And it
And to
doesn't mean
that
you're
point, if your
failing.
partner tried really hard to cook you dinner, you don't go, "Ugh, I
Yeah.
hate it. What's your problem?"
Yeah. But we're also, if they were like, yeah, it just doesn't taste the same to me, we're not normally like, I'm the worst person ever. Right. And so
Right. Ideally.
of
Ideally.
just
Yeah.
making sure, yeah, that there is also freedom to explore
Yep.
this and look at it as kind of an ongoing exploration, not a
Yeah.
recipe that I'm going to get once and remake over and over again.
Ooh, I like that. That feels like so relatable, because I've never made the same dish twice in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And Lucas will say that. He'll be like, "Oh man, this is really good. What's in it?" And I'm like, the things, just different things.
What was
You'll
in
never
there?
have it
Yeah,
again.
where did you buy the tomatoes? That's going to change the flavor versus all
You're
the
never going to have
pieces.
this meal again. I'm really glad you enjoyed it. It's probably not dissimilar from sexual relationships, right? It's never the exact same
Yeah,
thing twice, even if you put in the same ingredients.
absolutely.
Yeah,
So
I
have
love that.
curiosity, have, openness, for your
Hmm.
own experience, for your partner's experience, have
Hmm.
open communication
Hmm.
about it. The more we talk about it, the easier it becomes to keep talking
Hmm.
about it.
Yeah. Oh, and when we're talking about that, I think it's so important to let the person who gave birth really be in the driver's seat the first time. So while we're talking about like a lot
Mhm.
of lube, I think it's so important that there's just a ton of communication about
Mhm.
how we're doing this mechanically, because again, things are different, things are sensitive.
Yeah.
And right, we want it to be a positive, comfortable association. And so even if all the caution ends up being like, this is totally not necessary, I'm great, I'm doing great, which is often the case. Often it's a
Yeah.
lot of caution that wasn't necessary. Yay, that's wonderful. But
Mhm.
better to err on the side of too much and then be
Yeah.
like, actually, we're off to the races, we're doing good, we're right back where we started, rather than the other way around. So if you're in this process postpartum, or you are looking at this postpartum process and you're not the person giving birth, just keep in mind that like you can do yourself a lot of favors by being really, really attentive at the
Yeah.
initial approach.
Yes.
I'll let them read between the lines on that. um yeah, so then there's like trust that it's going to be okay and we can relax into this, and it's and it's something that I get to decide if it feels okay for my body.
Yeah.
Those are all really important things.
And, just a tip as far as that can be, sometimes having conversations beforehand about words we're going to use, language we're going to use to
Mm,
describe different things, because sometimes sex or communication during actual intercourse is hard for folks. I
a
also
great
work
point.
with couples to identify hand movements and positions, to be able to communicate, right? If I pull you close, it means I want more. If I push you back, it means I need you to pull back. If I touch your hand like this, or touch, your body in this way, so that there can also be sometimes nonverbal communication can be helpful.
Love
We
that.
just give all the ways to communicate in those
Hmm.
moments.
Hmm. I love that. That's so great. Okay. Wow. We could talk about this for a long time.
Okay.
This is
I
such
know.
a
I could go
fascinating
forever.
topic. I'm so ha. I'm so glad that you have this interest in this topic because as you were saying before you started, there's just really not anything out there that's like addressing sort of the intersection of
Mhm.
perinatal mental health and perinatal sexuality. And so, I'm so thankful for your time and your expertise because I feel like what an important topic.
Yeah.
I don't know a single relationship that does not have some kind of impact to their sex life after a new baby.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, relevant to everybody, right? I'm really
Yes.
thankful for your time and your tools and your ideas. Just Becca teaches on the subject too, so keep an eye out. I will put links below to some of her classes that are recorded. She has some live ones as well, um, and they're just like this, really warm, relatable, helpful. So keep an eye out for her. I have a feeling this is going to be something. I'm trying to convince her to write about it. So I have a feeling this is going to be
Krista
something
has
we're
to
going to
write a
hear.
book first.
We have to make like a blood oath to write. Um, but I think that like this is something that we're going to see a lot more of because so needed. And I love your approach because I think there's just a lot of warmth and you make it very approachable. You don't make it like an intimidating topic, which I think is good. So thank you for your time, Becca.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Bye.
Bye.